Assalamu alaikum. Hello and welcome to the special podcast live from Karachi, Pakistan. And I am joined today from London by Mr. Bond, Julian Bond, who needs no introduction in interfaith circles. He is somebody who has dedicated a considerable period of his life to interfaith activity, in particular in building relationships between Christians and Muslims. Uh, Julian is currently with the Methodist Church, and I understand that he is looking after their fundraising. And formerly, he was the director of the Christian Muslim Forum, which is a project built by the Church of England. So, without further delay, Julian, over to you. How do you describe your early years? What led you to be in this line of work?
Okay. Yes, that's an interesting one. It goes back quite a while. So I studied theology at Aberystwyth in Wales, Christian theology. And there was a second-hand bookshop across the road, and I would often be in there on the Monday because we had no lectures. And back in 1985, in this dusty old Welsh bookshop, I found a copy of the Quran. It was Rodwell's translation. And I thought, oh, that looks interesting. And then it sat on my shelf for 15 years. And then when I was working for the Inland Revenue, I was looking for something to read on the commute. So I read it. And it reminded me of the King James Bible in many ways. And I thought, okay, I've read the Islamic scriptures. I don't know what Islam is about. So I began to explore the early days of internet chat rooms, having arguments about Christianity and Islam. And it was from there that I responded to an invitation to go on secondment to the Archbishop of Canterbury's Christian Muslim Initiative. So I read the Quran in 2000, and the secondment, the initiative, started in 2002.
Okay. And are you from a religious family? Was your family particularly with any denomination? Did you have a Christian upbringing?
No, so my parents are not religious. My father is an atheist. I later found out, having become a Christian, that my grandmother went to church. So I'm not sure why that was not part of the conversation. So I connected with her in that way later on. And but there was a religious influence in school. So we had a Christian assembly every morning. And I remember being in assembly about the time that Cat Stevens, now Yusuf Islam, was singing Morning Has Broken. That was the era.
Great.
So I was conscious of some kind of divinity, spirituality as a youngster, but nothing explicit at home.
Right. And you worked for the Inland Revenue. Gosh, I have to file my tax returns, but I have to file them here. It reminds me. Okay. Looking at the Muslim community in Britain, yes, it's a religious community, but predominantly it is also an immigrant community. The vast majority of Muslims tend to be immigrants or children of immigrants, and there was widespread immigration into the UK from the Commonwealth. Do you see Christian-Muslim relations also having an overlap with racial relations between the majority and the minority?
Yeah, so one of the challenges facing British society and the Muslim community is British, not everybody, but British unwelcome attitudes to people from abroad. And I think this has been picked up in the Islamophobia definition in this country, which talks about Islamophobia being a kind of racism. So the people who have hostile attitudes towards Muslims, they probably know very little about Islam, but they see someone who is brown or is different, wearing Muslim style clothes, whatever that means, and feels unhappy that they're there. So there's a lot of connection, and for people working in the area of interfaith relations, particularly in church, it can go alongside racial justice and social responsibility. And I think that the big challenge for many people, although it works out differently in different places, so it's normal to be very diverse in London, but London is not like the rest of the country, and other places where there are large populations of people of different ethnicities and religions. That isn't everyone's experience. Where you get to sort of white monoculture, then people are more wary, tend to be, of immigrants, and this is what gives the BNP and UKIP its energy. And there isn't necessarily an appetite to find out about different cultures, different ethnicities, different religions. And for people of a religion, say Christianity, then there might be the attitude, well, you're a Christian, why would you be interested in another religion? You don't need to know about it, or you should be trying to convert people.
Okay. Now, religious dialogue has many levels. There is proselytism, where people try to preach their religion to convert other people. There is, general and exploratory element to interfaith. How do you see the dialogue between Muslims and Christians developing in England? Is it more polemical, or is it more exploratory, or a bit of both? How do you see that?
Okay, so there's different strands of Christianity and Islam in this country and elsewhere. And with those different strands comes different attitudes, different theologies, different schools of thought. And I think basically there's a spectrum from the polemical, the apologetic, the evangelistic, the proselytizing, the encounter, the dialogue, and the deeper sharing between people of religion who are not trying to prove or convert or argue about anything. And some people are up for dialogue, and the national denominations, Church of England, Methodist Church, Catholic Church, Baptist, United Reformed Church, Salvation Army, nationally, there is a commitment to dialogue, and this fits into the ecumenical structures that we have in this country. So officially and formally, there are these relationships, and Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, has been involved in high-level initiatives and dialogues with people of other faiths, particularly through the Christian Muslim Forum and the Council of Christians and Jews. And in an ideal world, everyone would be involved in that and up for that. But it's quite a minority pursuit to be into religious conversation and exploration. And even the people who are involved in it, the activists, the interfaithers, are involved in different, some at the sort of representative level, some academic, some through scriptural reasoning and collaboration. My particular area of interest is the deeper stuff, when you actually get together and pray and read scripture and explore each other's spiritualities and not worry about the boundaries, which is often a part of the more formal dialogues.
Okay, you mentioned the Christian Muslim Forum, and you have been, leading it for quite since 2006. I was looking it up. Now, this is a project that was started by the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Rowan Williams, who is obviously the head of the Church of England. But we also see, other denominations in it. Like, for example, the Methodist Church. What is the interest of the Methodist Church in engaging with Muslims? And how come you have the Methodists on a Church of England project?
Okay, so I hope you don't mind me clarifying some of the things that you were saying. So the first president of the Christian Muslim Forum, or patron of the Christian Muslim Forum, was Archbishop Rowan Williams, but the actual originator of the initiative was Archbishop Carey, and that came out of his experiences with Muslims when he was on national service in the Middle East in the 1950s. And in 1997, he hosted a dinner for the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, the seminary in Egypt. And he said publicly then that he wanted to do something to build good relations between Christians and Muslims in England. It's limited to England because of the Church of England. That was taken up by Archbishop Rowan when he became Archbishop in 2002. And then later by Archbishop Justin, who came in, I think, about 2013, thereabouts. So the Church of England is the national church for England. It's the state church. The Archbishop is not the head, nor is the Queen. So theologically, Christ is seen as the head of the church. The Queen is the supreme governor, and the Archbishop, it's not necessarily about hierarchy and responsibility. It's like a first among equals. So it's more of a spiritual thing. So the national church was looked to by the Muslim community as, here's the church, we're Muslims in England, here's the Church of England, it makes sense, there is an archbishop. He doesn't represent all the Christians in this country, but he is the senior Christian religious figure. And at the time when the forum was being set up, Saki Badawi was still around, and he was seen by many as the key Muslim in this country.
Yeah.
So there's that sort of respect and recognition. And it was interesting as a Methodist being involved in the early conversations. Should we set up some kind of body, and should the Archbishop be its patron? So Muslims of all denominations, all ethnicities, schools of thought, they all thought that the Archbishop was the one who could do it because of his role, his status, etc. In a way which Christians from other denominations who don't have an Archbishop might have had a different idea. So there was quite a strong push from the Muslim community, or those that we consulted, that it should be the Archbishop who was the single patron of the Christian Muslim Forum. The involvement of other churches really does reflect the ecumenical structures in this country. So we have churches together in England, which brings together all the denominations, and churches together in Britain and Ireland, which is obviously a bit bigger. And all the churches are represented, and the leadership rotates through the different groups, and all the denominations are working together in that way. And we tried to reflect that in the initial makeup of the forum, so that we did have a Methodist representative, although that Methodist representative was actually a representative of the Free Churches, nonconformists. So there's a lot of cooperation. Some of the things that we did touched on the areas where there was less cooperation and less certainty about the whole business of engaging with Muslims. And you might want to pick up that later.
Okay. Now, as a former resident of Birmingham, I studied at Birmingham, I've lived there, and I also came in contact with a lot of black churches, particularly during my own interfaith work. I was, introduced to a number of black Pentecostal churches, Church of God of Prophecy, New Testament Church of God. There was a Bishop Wilton Powell. There was Dr. Joe Aldred. I remember doing a book launch for him,
Yes.
Caribbean Christianity. Are black churches also a part of the Church of England or other ecumenical bodies? Are they involved with the Christian Muslim Forum in any way? What is your take on the black churches?
Yes, they were and they are throughout. So let's see. So we had a representative of the black Pentecostal churches, the Reverend Esme Beswick, was our first black Christian president, and she was succeeded by Bishop Donette Thomas from South London, and it was really important to have that constituency involved. They faced various challenges. So just as there are leading black Christians involved in Interfaith, there are also many who had some big issues with it. And the people that I mentioned, Esme and Donette, they faced all kinds of challenges from their own communities about being involved in Christian-Muslim relations. And I think they got quite a bit of flack about it. And they were very brave and bold to be involved in it, and they were very committed to it, but at some cost. And it was hard work for them to be doing that within those communities. And that doesn't apply to all of the black churches, but there is a particular tension there. When I was on the Archbishop's initiative, I met with some black Pentecostal ministers in Southall, with Dr. Ataullah Siddiqui, who's very well known in interfaith circles in this country, but also around the world, I'm sure. And we were talking to them about why it would be a good thing to have good relationships with Muslims, and they couldn't see it at all. And I was really struggling, but Ataullah was really eloquent because though he's been a Muslim all his life, he was educated by Scottish Presbyterian missionaries in India. So he had a really good insight to Christianity and really good at bridging the gap. So he made his best effort to explain why it's better to be friends and good neighbours rather than have these sort of feelings of enmity. But they were not persuaded. And I met some of them later at one of Esme's events. And so the first time I met them, we were in this exploratory phase. The next time I met them, I was running the Christian Muslim Forum. And this was an event at Lambeth Palace. And they were sort of shocked and outraged that I was working with Muslims in this way.
Okay. Okay. Well, how do you see liberal churches or liberal denominations in the current scenario? Uh, People like the Quakers, like the Unitarians, who have been sort of a bit different from the popular Christian denominations like the Roman
Hmm.
Catholics or the Protestants. Uh, from my experience, they were very proactive with interfaith work, particularly the Quakers. So, how
Hmm.
do you see them, and what is your view about them?
Well, the Quakers are really interesting because anyone can be a Quaker. You could be a Quaker if you wanted to.
Okay.
So there are theistic Quakers and non-theistic Quakers. There are Christian Quakers and a whole variety of people. You may know someone called Daoud Bone.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah,
not.
I know.
Yes, I thought
Yes.
you would. So
Uh, yes.
he converted to Islam when he was a
Yes.
Quaker, and when you
Yes.
probably know this story. When he converted to Islam, I think he wrote to the Quaker meeting and says, "I can't be a Quaker anymore because I converted to Islam." And they said, "No, that's no problem. You can still be a Muslim Quaker." So I think he still is a
Okay.
Muslim Quaker, which is great. So the Quakers don't have any theological barriers. I may not even particularly see Muslims as other in the way that other Christians do, because the essence of Quakerism is that God is in everybody, and um, that sort of commonality, brotherhood, sisterhood across everybody, and the spirit being in everyone and moving through everyone.
Yeah.
So very interfaith ready, but in a way which is just sort of transcends all the boundaries and the difficulties and differences. And there have been some leading Quaker interfaith practitioners who've written books about interfaith. I remember reading one. Um, I can't remember the writer or the title now, but yeah, good in this area. The Unitarians are also particularly interesting because being Unitarian and therefore not Orthodox Christians, that was Orthodox with a small o, they are not part of many of the Christian ecumenical structures and are on the fringes of Christianity or outside Christianity as far as many people are concerned. They get on better within the interfaith sector. So I remember the first year that I was running the forum, I had an email from a Unitarian minister who was quite upset that they were able to get on well with the Muslim community and in interfaith, but rejected by the churches. So we did have Unitarian involvement around the Christian Muslim Forum, although no formal members because of that ecumenical issue, because all the members of the Christian Muslim Forum came through the ecumenical structures. And Muslims and Unitarians get on like a house on fire because the sort of big creedal divides don't really exist between Islam and Unitarianism. So that's always been a good thing in that area, and it does lead to Muslims often saying in various kinds of ways, either jokingly or seriously or apologetically, polemically, that all Christians should be Unitarians, and then there would be no issues.
Okay. Now, Britain is out of the European Union, or it will be after a
It will be.
certain time. And we are looking at a lot of change, not only in Europe, all over the world. Change is happening at a very rapid pace, an unexpected change. when Britain was part of the EU, there was an influx of immigrants from Eastern European countries. I remember being in Birmingham, and we had a lot of people coming in from Poland, from the Czech Republic. What is the situation now, and is their presence posing some challenges to the churches? Like, are the churches equipped to deal with the, Eastern European Christians in any way whatsoever?
I always find that quite exciting in some respects, because I used to live in the east of England, and there were lots of Polish people. There had been since the Second World War, but then more coming in more recently. So in Bedfordshire, and I guess other places, there were already Polish Catholic churches from many years ago, and most Polish people are Catholics. So they arrived in England, and they really swelled the churches. I remember driving past the Polish Catholic Church in Dunstable on a Sunday morning. There were so many worshippers for the Mass that they were actually out on the pavement because they couldn't all fit in the church. It created challenges for the Catholic Church because they didn't have enough Polish priests. So when people were coming here from Poland, then the church had to bring Polish priests over to minister to them. So it created a lot of life in the community and in the church, and gave it a big boost. But being an island nation and various other things, this thing about Englishness met with a lot of resistance from some people, and fitted into this picture. A lot of it was directed against Muslim immigrants, but things like the British National Party, the English Defence League, the UK Independence Party, Britain First, all these anti-immigrant political parties, minority groups, but very loud and getting a lot of media attention and tapping into island mentality and connecting up with the far right and creating a lot of unhelpful noise around immigrant communities. And I guess that was the kind of thing that fueled the questioning and the uncertainty and anxiety, which led to David Cameron doing the referendum for Brexit in 2016, and which backfired. I don't think he wanted us to come out. He wanted to prove that we should stay in, but it backfired on him, I think.
Okay. Now, interfaith dialogue, particularly Christian-Muslim dialogue in Britain, has an element of internationalism as well. Would you agree to that? That, yes, we are British Christians or English Christians and we are English Muslims, but we do also have links with the Islamic world, with Pakistan, with India, with other parts. And do you think there needs to be some sort of overseas engagement as well? Like, for example, British Muslims and British Christians visiting a country like Pakistan, having a dialogue with Pakistani Christians, and looking at the experiences that they have as a minority faith over here, and vice versa. Do you think that would be something conducive?
Yes, we were involved in some of that. So we did a Britain-Indonesia exchange, and this was Christians and Muslims from England going to Indonesia, and then Christians and Muslims coming from Indonesia to this country. That was one of our early exchanges. I think we had some government funding for that one. There was another one that we did, which was an exchange to Bosnia. So Christians and Muslims from here and Christians and Muslims from Bosnia, and they visited Srebrenica, and I wish I'd gone actually. Very emotional for those involved, and the reason for that was to engage with that whole question of religious genocide and the aftermath and the ongoing hostility, but also the reconciliation, and to learn from that and to bring that energy back and say, this is why we need to work on building good relationships, because we don't want that to happen. Although the people in Bosnia were living peacefully until things were stirred up and it became people seeing a Muslim as an enemy or a Christian as an enemy. And the other piece of work that the forum was involved in was going to Israel and Palestine. So Christians and Muslims from here going there. I'm not sure I think that was a one-way trip, but then meeting with Christians, Jews and Muslims in Israel and Palestine and exploring how things are. And Ajmal Masroor, who you probably know, London Imam, he was part of one of those groups, and he wrote a blog series on Facebook. I'm not sure if he wrote it anywhere else, describing all of his experiences, including being stopped for hours as he was going into Israel because he was a Muslim.
Okay, you mentioned Israel. Now, as we speak, there have been very drastic developments between Israel and some countries in the Muslim world. For example, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, Dubai, they have recognized Israel. They have formed diplomatic relations. And I believe Bahrain has also, and Oman, some Middle Eastern countries as well. How do you see, these developments and the issue of Palestine? And what would you say is the take of the churches, particularly the Christian churches? Are they pro-Palestine or are they pro-Israel? What do you see in this?
I think the churches are on both sides of that question. And in the individual denominations, there are people who are on both sides. And it can be very tense within the churches, the level of heat and disagreement about the way to go. Some Christians see the plight of the Palestinians, and some Palestinians are Christians, so there's a connection there. Some Christians are more Zionist, favourable to Israel, the land of Jesus, and so on, and so they feel the connection with with Israel, and they may see sort of end times prophecies fitting in with what's happening. One of the things that the Methodist Church has been doing over the last few years, we gave a grant to the Council of Christians and Jews to explore these questions and these attitudes, open up the dialogue amongst Christians and Jews in this country, informed by visits to Israel and Palestine. So leading members of the Methodist Church have been involved in that, and CCJ produced a resource quite recently about these conversations. And being able to maintain the conversation and the relationship and the friendship, however difficult, is really crucial, because otherwise you're just shouting at each other or worse. One of the things that we did in the Christian Muslim Forum related to this was back in 2014 in the summer, when there was a massive outbreak of hostility between Israel and Gaza. And it got very difficult to talk about it because everyone was very upset, angry, defensive, or however they were. I used to run the Facebook group for the Christian Muslim Forum, and I had to stop the conversations happening because anytime anyone mentioned Israel and Palestine and Gaza, it just degenerated into sort of hate speech and so on. But so what we did is we had a prayer event in the tent at St Ethelburgers. So this is a Centre for Peace and Reconciliation in central London. It's actually a church that took the brunt of an IRA bomb back in 1993, I think, and it was redeveloped as a Peace and Reconciliation Centre. So we gathered in the tent, Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, and others, and we prayed together. And we introduced it by saying, we're not going to argue, we're not going to defend anything, we're not going to debate, we're just going to share the pain. And we had 3 people selected to offer a prayer, and we all prayed together, and it was packed in the tent. And it was one of the most beautiful and I think successful things that we ever did in the forum. And I wondered why we'd never done it sooner, just that act of being there and praying together. And people like to say, particularly the activists, the protagonists in the debates about Israel, Palestine, one state, two state, whatever it is, that things like that don't do anything. They don't achieve anything. They don't come up with a solution, which may be the limitation of those initiatives, that they are looking for a solution, trying to fix something which may not be fixable. But actually being and praying together is just a tremendously moving and healing experience. It was in my experience and the experience of the people who were there. And as people of faith, I think that is what we should be doing. I don't think we should be arguing. I don't particularly think we should be debating unless we're doing it really well, good debating. I don't think we should be trying to convert each other. I think we should just be. I'm not sure if that quite answered your question.
Yeah, no, it does in some ways, but it also leads to other questions. Our traditions have an element of, outreach. Like Muslims have da'wah, where they are obligated to share the message of Islam with non-Muslims. And the Christians also have the mission, the missionary outreach. They also want people to convert to Christianity. How can we, sort of ignore this element during our interfaith interaction, during our dialogue? Aren't we then ignoring our respective traditions if we don't do that?
Yes, so one of the best pieces of work that the Christian Muslim Forum did was back in 2009, when we issued the Ethical Witness Guidelines, which I think you're familiar with. And I think that one of your colleagues, or maybe even the director of the organization that you used to work for in Birmingham, if I'm not mixing up organizations, IPCI?
No, well, I didn't work for them.
Yes.
There's Mr. Shamshad Khan, I believe it's
right.
Mr. Khan. But I didn't work for them.
Okay.
I don't have any formal link with them.
Right. You had some. You had some connection with them, but maybe not a
I
full.
just met them. I was a resident of
Right.
Birmingham.
Okay.
I
Right.
knew
Okay.
them, but I don't.
Okay.
I,
Okay.
They didn't employ me. Yeah.
Right. So he came and spoke at the launch of our ethical witness guidelines, and that was picking up on this very issue. We have two faiths which are missionary, as often perceived, described, and I don't necessarily completely agree with all of that myself, but I come from a different position. But how do we do dialogue and interfaith and still have this missionary impulse? The guidelines are on the Christian Muslim Forum website, christianmuslimforum.org. And they say that we won't demean either faith, we won't treat converts as trophies, we can't convert anyone, only God can do that. People can change their religion and they will go where God takes them. And it's completely up to God. What else? I can't remember all of them. Some of the points in the statement are more challenging than others. So that was when we began to discover the boundaries of this whole business of interfaith and evangelism. But what we were doing is trying to engage with this question that you've asked, and we were able to draw on a fellow Birmingham resident, Dr. Andrew Smith from Scripture Union, who then set up Youth Encounter and then the Feast. So he'd been doing this work in Birmingham for many years. So he was a schools worker for Scripture Union, Christian organisation. And I think almost immediately when he went into some of the Birmingham schools to talk about Christianity, and in some of the schools they were majority Muslim or almost totally Muslim, he asked himself, I'm a Christian, I do believe in evangelism, but what am I doing here? How do I talk to all these Muslims, and what kind of sense does it make? So he, I suppose you could say, he fell into dialogue at that point, and it's great to hear him talk about it. He's written about it also. We need to do this PhD on it. So he came up with some guidelines. As a school's youth worker, he would get together young people, Christian and Muslim. And one of the issues that he faced was from Muslim parents saying, I hope you're not going to convert my kids, which was never the aim of these events. So he produced guidelines which would then say to the parents, your children are safe with us. And that it should be completely clear at any Christian event whether events are evangelistic or whether they are for dialogue. And people should be open about sharing their faith, but not being coercive. These are the other principles that just came back to me. So we can share our faith. We can witness, like the Shahada witness. We can share our faith, and just saying this is my faith, that isn't actually oppressive to anyone. They might disagree, or they might not, but you're not doing any harm by saying this is what I believe. So he had these ethical principles, and then we expanded them for the Christian Muslim Forum, acknowledging that they largely came from him. Then we got different denominations to sign up to them. Muslim organizations signed up to them. There's one organization which you may have heard about, the Mahaba Network, and they actually refer in their evangelistic materials, they are an evangelistic organization. They are interested in converting Muslims. It's clear that that's what they do, but they say we act according to these ethical principles.
Yeah. Wouldn't Muslims be at a disadvantage given they are a minority, given their organizations don't have the resources, the funds? If they were to get into some sort of a partnership with the majority Christians who have a lot of money, who also want to proselytize, don't you think that interfaith partnership should be at an equal footing, and perhaps wouldn't Muslims be at a disadvantage?
Okay, so yes, so there are community and structural and resourcing inequalities. In the forum itself, it was 50-50 Christian and Muslim. So we had specialists and we had advisors and we had presidents. And there was always a pair, a Christian and a Muslim. We even tried to pair someone with the Archbishop of Canterbury. Having started out with just a sole patron, we spent a lot of time agonizing over whether there should be a Muslim patron, and Shahid Raza, the imam at Leicester Central Mosque, was our first Muslim patron, and then we had another one following him, but it didn't quite work because the communities are so different. So we did try to level up, but it was very clear that structurally there's almost no comparison between the community and the resourcing structures between the two faith communities in this country. I remember about 2013 or so, when Baroness Varsi was talking about what ought to be done in this area, and I wrote to her saying that more resources need to be put into the Muslim community. And there have been Muslim community organisations which have tried to do this, like MINAB, Mosques and Imams National Advisory Board, which had government funding when it was set up, but then I think that was through a Labour government. When the Conservatives came in, the funding was pulled, and it's not had the same level of resource. And there are other organisations like Faith Associates who are very active in helping mosques and Muslim community organisations to meet their charity commission requirements and generally set themselves up, and there are others as well. But there is a serious inequality between the communities, and that eventually resourcing may fix that. In the meantime, we just need to treat each other as equals. There is also a very interesting situation in the Muslim community here, which you will know about, which is that the zakat, the charity money, tends to go overseas.
Yes.
Where it could be used in this country, and if it was, then it could begin to strengthen the community and do charitable purposes here, and that is a lack. And it's not an issue in a Muslim country or Muslim majority country, but here it really is. And it could be argued that this is a Muslim country. There's a significant Muslim community here, and there needs to be a rethink. So Humaira Khan of the An-Nisa Society and the Radical Middle Way, Fuad Nadi, who died recently, they were involved in the Kidma campaign to get the the charitable money to stay in this country. And I think maybe it's only the National Zakat Foundation who are actually delivering on that in this country at the moment.
Yeah. Now, interfaith also has its critics. And one criticism which has been leveled against interfaith initiatives in recent times, particularly involving the Muslim community, one criticism is that interfaith projects are a front for something else. There is a hidden agenda. And we also see, I've been attending conferences abroad in Turkey and other UAE. I see ministers and officials of Western governments, European governments, taking an interest in Muslim affairs for security. Like, I was checking some documents the other day. The Spanish Spain has some sort of an interfaith project, but it is aimed towards security issues. And the Denmark also has something like that. France, the French president has recently issued a statement which was not very palatable in Muslim circles about Islam in France or Islamists. What is the relationship of interfaith and law enforcement? Particularly, I will use the acronym PVE, Preventing Violent Extremism. Because when I was in Britain, I remember I worked for a consulting company. There were a lot of project proposals floating around. People were looking to become experts on PVE, and they were using the Muslim community as a target, group. So, what do you see the relationship between PVE projects and interfaith?
Okay, so this is basically a political question. In the early days of these PV programs, there was some blurring of the boundaries between interfaith and PVE. I think it's much clearer now, and I think the government did make it clearer that you have community cohesion initiatives coming from, I don't even remember the name now. It was the Department for Communities. This thing's called something different now. And then the PVE through the Home Office. So that distinction has been made. But there's a difficulty in how it's seen within the Muslim community. So one of the things that the Christian Muslim Forum was involved in was Near Neighbours, starting in 2010, and that was a government-funded community interfaith initiative. It was responding to the new Conservative government at the time saying, "We do God," in response to the early New Labour publicity, which is "We don't do God," although they did then go on to do God. So the Archbishop of Canterbury's Interfaith advisor, in partnership with others, wrote to the government and said, "Can you fund this program to go around the country where there is a mix of faiths, and to fund local and national interfaith projects bringing people together?" And the Christian Muslim Forum was one of the bodies delivering that. Now that was cohesion. It was interfaith. It wasn't prevent PVE. But I remember having a meeting back in, I think it was 2012, with some Muslim leaders in North London, in Hackney, and they were convinced that our new Near Neighbours interfaith program was actually prevent. And we had quite a difficult initial conversation saying, no, it's not prevent, this is interfaith, this is what this money is for, it's for cohesion, we're looking to build good relationships. And the people that they were already involved in good relationships and local interfaith forums, but it had this negative baggage attached to it because of government. And the whole PV thing came out of the government's response to 7/7, July 2005, the London bombings, and the Preventing Extremism Task Force, which came up with various recommendations, most of which weren't implemented. So there's that politicization, and the Muslim community has found itself since about 2001, continually under the microscope of society, media, government, etc., following the Northern riots in Blackburn and Bradford, where there's large Asian populations. And a lot of the PV work was in areas with Muslim communities. So in Birmingham, can't quite remember, near Spark Hill and areas around there were concerns about security cameras keeping an eye on Muslim communities in the street. There was a campaign against it.
Okay. Right. Very quickly, we are almost nearing our time. At a personal level, I noticed that you tweet about the Quran very often. You have a hashtag Quran Hour. How come you became interested in that? And are your other Christian colleagues happy with you tweeting the Islamic scripture?
Okay, yeah. So I'm not that. Like I said at the beginning, that was my entry point into this whole journey, and I've regularly read the Quran throughout all these years. So before I went on the Archbishop's initiative, I read it again, thinking there would be lots of conversations about the Quran, and there weren't, but I was ready for them. And then regularly, and spent quite a lot of time with my friend Imam Dr. Musharraf Hussain in Nottingham, who produced his translation of the Quran 3 years ago, the Majestic Quran. And I was in his masjid a few years ago where we were reading together the biblical story of Yusuf, and his translation into plain English of Surah Yusuf. So I was involved in that, and I think all my tweeting and my writing, I have a blog series, How to Read the Quran, it's on medium.com. That came out of some of the Ramadan practices that I've had over the years, not just occasional fasting, but reading through it during the month of Ramadan, like Muslims do, although in English, not in Arabic, and looking at how to share it with people who had issues with it. So in a lot of the conversations, particularly on social media, we hear all kinds of negative things about it, and I wanted to challenge those. And so I was writing the blogs. I wrote them over a couple of years and published them over 3 years. I would tweet the verses that I was reading. I remember on one occasion preparing for a sort of introductory interfaith session, a training course, and was quoting lots of Islamic scriptures supporting interfaith. And there were so many of them that I had to stop before I got all the way through. There were loads and loads of interesting. Surah 49:13, which is on the wall outside Finsbury Park Mosque, about God creating diversity so that we could know each other. It's really great to see that verse there. So it was about that sharing, and yes, it does cause some concerns, and some people would even say, well, you shouldn't even be reading the Quran, and I do get a bit of flack for it on Twitter, but it's just normal for me, and people who know me know that it's normal for me, and that's my thing. And it's been great to share it. So the blogs, I've dedicated each one to a different Muslim friend, over 114, because some I dedicated to more than one person. So it's been a great journey and great to share it.
Okay, and as someone who reads the Bible, what is your view on the statements by Jesus where he is saying that there is only one God Like, we read in the Gospels, a disciple goes to Jesus and he asks him, Master, what commandment is the greatest of all? And he
Hmm.
says, Hear, O Israel, your Lord, your God is one.
Yeah,
Do you see Jesus as a monotheist, or as a Unitarian, or in your view, was he a Trinitarian?
it would be anachronistic to call Jesus a Trinitarian,
Okay.
because the whole discussion and the doctrinal development came about later. I'm the development is rooted in what we read in the Gospels, and they can be taken in different ways. But that's where it came from, and the idea of the Trinity is in Christianity is completely related to this question of who is Jesus. It then can get interesting to reflect on the Shema, which you quoted from Deuteronomy, Hear, O Israel. But the idea within Christianity of the Trinity is that Trinity is a monotheistic position. That is what it's doing. It's not saying we have three gods, which is popular in some Muslim apologetic and polemic. It's saying this is how we understand this situation of Jesus, Son of God, God the Son, without becoming polytheists. I know that can be complicated and confusing for everybody, but that is what it's trying to do. But I'm not an apologist for the Trinity.
Okay. Okay, Julian, thank you very much for your time. Any final words of advice or any recommendations
Fine.
you want to give to Muslims, particularly in
Oh,
this
right.
part
Okay.
in
Yes.
Pakistan? My audience is predominantly of Pakistani Muslims. Anything you wish to say to them?
Yeah. Well, Assalamu alaikum, firstly. Yeah, I think that the kind of things that I've done, I would encourage everybody to do. I think that there is a particular invitation, if you like, dawah within the Quran to engage with the previous revelations. Because I think the way that the Quran works is that it refers to things that have happened in the previous scriptures. Surah Yusuf is particularly interesting because it's the only long story in one piece, and it is very close to the biblical account. The others, you get little snippets. So when it talks about Ayub, Job, in the Quran, there's a few verses here and there. You can't pick up the whole story. When the commentators wrote about this, then they referred to the previous scriptures to pick up the whole story. I think there are some hadiths around some of the characters, the prophets in the Quran, which pick up these details which are in the Bible but not in the Quran. So I think we should all be reading each other's scriptures. We should read our own scriptures, and we should read other scriptures with respect for understanding, not so we can pick them apart, not so that we can argue with them or about them, but so we can see what it's like for the people who follow those scriptures. And I think that is, some Muslims might want to challenge this. I think that's what Islam is about, to bring it all together, sit down with it all, and say, well, we're all connected, Christians, Jews, and Muslims. We have scriptural links. I think it's more challenging for Christians, but we have these attitudes in our communities. We've got our own scripture. Why read another scripture? But I don't think that's right, because the books go together. So the fact that Jesus is in the Quran, that's got to be an invitation to Christians to read the Quran. though they might not see it. And the fact that there are references in the Quran has got to be an invitation. I was cautioned about this in the previous online interview, about God's intention for the reader to engage with the other scriptures. I think that's what it's about. And also to attend each other's places of worship. I know it can be difficult in tense situations, but for Muslims to go into church, not so that they can be converted, and hopefully not so people will want to convert them, but to be there with people.
Okay, Julian, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure speaking to you. There are many other things we can talk about, but we are running short of time. Indeed, the central figure of Christianity is also a mighty messenger of God in Islam, Jesus Christ. We have Jesus as somebody who is common to both of us. Thank you on that note, and I hope that people would have improved their understanding of these great traditions, Christianity and Islam, as a result of these conversations. And we hope to continue similar conversations in the future. Thank you for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you.